Hello, world. This is Carole from Viva Vacation, and I'm joined by my husband, Bernie.
Hello, world.
This is our third podcast. We're sharing our experiences along the way for our 30-day European adventure. And this will be the first one of our 14-day cruise of the Mediterranean. Nope, I did not say that well. How do you say that, Bernie?
It's Mediterranean.
I cannot get that one out properly. So let's start by just sharing why we chose to do a 14-day cruise, what we like to do on the ship, what is our preference for cabin location, and so forth. And then we'll talk about our first two stops. So we are on the Enchanted Princess. It is known for the TV show of The Love Boat, which I believe was in the 70s and possibly early 80s. And that TV show was on the Pacific Princess, which is it was a very small ship of the Princess cruise line. So it's very interesting, the history because of that. Even the horn when we depart from a port is the theme from that TV show, which is really sharp.
Yeah, I'm sure you'd recognize it if you hear it for the younger generation.
Yeah, for the older generation. So we have a balcony cabin in the very back of the ship. So we are facing where we've been, I guess.
Facing aft. Yeah, we're aft of the ship and facing exactly where we've been.
Yeah. So the reason we like to choose the back of the ship, there's a few of them. When there's less people, so there are only a few cabins in the back of the ship, it means that there is less noise. And that's especially important during the evenings and during the night.
Less traffic in the hallways.
Less traffic, yeah, definitely. More quiet. A lot of people prefer midship because there's less walking, but actually with all the eating that we do on a cruise ship, we prefer to walk it off as much as we can by being in the back of the ship. So it also gives us a very unique view, like we said. In a lot of the ports that we docked in, the captain backed up the ship and we were actually facing the city, which was quite neat.
Yeah, a couple of really nice stops in Italy that were our balcony. You just saw the whole overview of the cities that we were in. It was really, really amazing.
Yeah. So Princess is, I would describe it as having a more mature clientele. There are very few children on these ships, and which means that we're not the life of the party. We have very long days in port, and when we get in at night, we like it to be quiet, and when we go to bed at night as well, we don't like the parties in the hallways and whatnot. So this is a perfect cruise line for us. But really at different points of your life and depending on your travel preferences, you should research the different type of cruise lines and what they can offer you. When our son was younger, we did the Carnival, the Norwegian, the Royals, just because it had more activities for the kids. But now that we're traveling as two more mature adults, I won't say older, we like the more quiet ships. So I will say that the food is we actually really like the food on Princess.
The food is really, I mean, the food is good on all cruise lines, but Princess is very good. It's always got a good international blend of different cuisines. If you like Indian food, there's always something to eat. There's always, of course, a good selection of steaks and seafoods, and the buffet has just about everything you can imagine on a rotation. So and great bread and cheese. It's always good.
Yeah, and you of course don't forget the 24-hour pizza and 24-hour room service. You can pretty much eat all day if you want, but with, lots to see and do. So
Yeah. People always joke about eating on the cruise ships, and there's a reason for that. But I think you want to focus on the activities and being there, and not just the food.
yeah. So why do we choose to cruise? And we've cruised a lot in our 20 years together. Cruising offers a little glimpse into a city or two each day that you're in port. So rather than flying to a certain city, for example, Europe, where you'd focus a whole week or more on one city, this gives you a glimpse, a real sample of what it has to offer, and then you can decide, do I feel like I have enough on this city, or would I like to come back and visit for more?
Yeah, I kind of see cruising, particularly in Europe, as kind of having a moving hotel room. Like the cruise ship is your hotel room, and you're kind of going through various ports and cities and getting a really good flavor and snapshots. And you do have a full day in most places, typically from at least 9 a.m. till 6 p.m. or so, give or take. Sometimes even earlier in the morning. So you can do quite a bit in a day. You really pack it in and take advantage of everything that you can in that day.
Yep. So we'll talk a little bit about, because before we had done a lot of cruise in North America, the Caribbean, the Panama Canal, the West Coast, a lot of those places, but we had not cruised the Mediterranean before. Here I go again. So Bernie, maybe you can explain how it's different than a Caribbean cruise.
Yeah, I think most people start off in North America, anyways. Most people start off doing a Caribbean cruise because it's just closer, it's easier. They've heard about it. The sunny weather if you want to get away from a cold Canadian winter. So that's quite common. But European cruises, so far, from my limited experience so far, is I think the cruise days are busier. There's so much to do. There's a lot of walking involved in the cities, and another thing, the Mediterranean as a sea tends to be a bit smoother than perhaps the Caribbean. From what we've experienced so far, I guess it may depend on the season, but it's been fairly smooth. So expect long days of activities if you want to do activities. That's right. Some people just prefer to stay in the port and kind of walk around and go shopping, and that's fine. But that's definitely not our preference. So you got to have really comfortable shoes. Be prepared for long walks on cobblestones and uneven surfaces. And it's always good to have a little bit of cash, because you never know when you're going to need to maybe take a cab somewhere to catch a bus or a train to get back to the ship. It's also good to have a blend of activities. You can, in most places, most cities, you can kind of do the same. Get on a bus, do a historic site, a museum, those kinds of things, and that's great if you're into that. But my suggestion is try to get a blend. Do that history piece, because it's so fascinating and so interesting, and there's some really nerdy, geeky guides that we've seen who really know their stuff, so it's really quite interesting. But also try to soak in just the atmosphere of a city, the atmosphere of Europe. There's so many beautiful places. And sometimes just walking in a touristy downtown area, just having a coffee or a beer on a cafe terrace, and just you doing some people watching. That's a lot of fun too. So there's so many great options, but really try to have a blend. We've done a couple of biking tours, and we'll talk about those in a bit. Those are a great fun as well. But I think the key thing is be realistic with your time. We talk about packing things in, but you got to be realistic and make sure that you do have enough time to do what you want to do, but don't overbook yourself, because things can take longer with lineups and queues. And just want to make sure that you give yourself the right time to do the activities that you want.
Yeah, for example, our next podcast will be on Italy, but just as an example, our plans didn't really go scheduled in one of the cities, and on top of that, there were a lot of people, and what we hadn't realized is for the big sites, there's you're going through security like in an airport. It can be a little bit chaotic, so you need to kind of mentally prepare for that and give yourself enough time. And that's even if you have your tickets purchased in advance, because if you don't have your tickets, you won't get in. So that's a sure thing.
Yeah, expect to wait a long time.
Yeah, well, a lot of them were really sold out,
Yeah.
like immediately. Like you couldn't have gotten in even if you wanted to wait. So let us talk a little bit about the difference of excursions on a cruise ship. So obviously, the cruise lines will try to sell you their excursions. Um, they're there to make money, of course, like any other business. Um, but having done so many cruises, we now, with all that experience, have we know the ins and out of what it has to offer. So the cruise line typically are much the prices are much higher, and you usually go to one site, maybe two, but for the second, if you're seeing two sites, the price will be much higher. There's also a lot of companies out there that sell tours to cruisers privately. So there's a lot of websites, a lot that you would know. Please discuss that with your travel agent. There are a lot of options at a much better price, and there's other options as well, such as doing a bike tour. And we mentioned this again because for us, the bike tour is a very inexpensive way to see a city in places that you would not be able to see in a car or a bus. And it really gives you a different perspective of that city. So that's why we like to mix things up and do different things. But if I had to say what our preferred method, I guess, of doing excursion, it is with small groups.
Yeah, that's definitely better. You get to know the people a little bit that you're with. So, for example, if you're a group of say 10 to 15 or 12 people, you kind of get to know them a little bit and talk to them during stops, and it's really interesting to find out where you're from, what do you do, all those kinds of things. Where have you traveled? Compared to a big bus with 50 people in it that you really won't get a chance to talk to people in, and stopping and getting off the bus takes so long and those types of things. But there's something for everybody, I guess, with cruising. Some people, that's what they prefer, and that's great too. But I think we've discovered that the small group excursion, or even just the two of us going off on our own, is our preferred style. But there's an option for everybody.
Yeah. One of the things on this cruise that we discovered, just because we only did one large bus tour this trip, and the rest were all a small bus. So 50 people versus 14, for example. And I don't know if it was just coincidence, but we tend to see a lot of people not being on time in the larger buses. And I don't know if it's because they haven't made the connection, or it's just because the risk is higher with more people. But the smaller buses that we've been on, people have always been respectful and on time, and we've chatted with other passengers and got to know them a little bit better. So lots of options, and like Bernie mentioned, you can just not book a tour if you want, or an excursion, and just walk around like the nearest city if you want. Now, personally, I think you're missing out if you're doing that, because sometimes the big attractions, and I use that word lightly, but the historical sites are not at a walking distance from where the ship is docking. So do your research well ahead of time. I find, like, if you read about where you're going and the sites that you want to see, it really adds value and history and knowledge to what you're going to see in advance.
Yeah, that's such an important point, Carole. I think it really is a good idea to do a little bit of research and find out what are the sites, and try to select what you're most interested in.
Yeah.
Because some of these tours, if you have a guided tour, they can go into quite a bit of detail. So it's good that if you're interested in the site and want to learn more about it.
So before we move on to our first two stops from our cruise, I will talk a little bit about life on board, especially for those of you who have not cruised before. So life on board, like Bernie mentioned, is basically a traveling hotel on water. However, the advantage of it is not having to unpack. So we were on a cruise ship for 2 weeks. We did not have to unpack once. Every night we knew we knew what to expect in terms of a meal back on the ship. And when we didn't have those 12-hour days of walking and visiting, and if we had any energy left, there's always stuff to do. Listening to music. On the Princess, they have the movies Under the Stars, which is really neat. They always have production shows, comedians, magicians. You can go to the casino. There's lectures. There's art and wine tasting. It's just so much to do, and you can choose to do nothing and sit on a deck and read a book.
That's right. Yeah, there's so many things. This boat, for example, has like a little jazz club where you can go and listen to some late night jazz. There's like a little Irish pub as well. So there's all kinds of great things. And the movies Under the Stars is kind of nice, where you can just go above deck and there's this giant screen outside, and you cuddle in a nice blanket on a chair and have some popcorn and you watch a movie outside on the Mediterranean. How good is that?
Yeah. No, life doesn't get any better than that, in my opinion. Okay, so enough about cruising. So like I mentioned earlier, we are going to have 3 different podcasts for our 14-day cruise, just because it's so long and we want to, limit the time of each podcast. So our next one will be on Italy, and the last one will be on Greece and Turkey. But today we're going to talk about the first 2 stops, which were Gibraltar and Marseille in France. So we're going to start with Gibraltar, which is also called the Rock, is actually owned by Great Britain since 1713. Even though it's much closer to Spain. Actually, when you're on Gibraltar, you can see Spain like
across the border.
Across the border, you can visually see Spain. So it's got a very neat history. What else is interesting about Gibraltar is that it's home to about 300 Barbary apes. It's the only wild monkey population in Europe. And Gibraltar also has a lot of tunnels that were digged, I guess, and created during the war, with a lot of them during the Second World War. It is another UNESCO World Heritage Site and has also a lot of caves. So Bernie, talk to us about the tour that we did in Gibraltar.
Yeah, so we did a small bus tour to St. Michael's Caves and the tunnels. What were those called?
The Great Siege.
Yeah, the Great Siege tunnels. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So a couple of stops and just amazing panoramic views. The St. Michael's Caves were just spectacular. They're so cavernous and big, and they've got these amazing lights inside, and the lights change color, and it's just breathtaking to be in those caves. And again, there's lots of people though, lots of stairs, so you have to be careful. But it's just breathtaking to be in those caves. The siege towns were really quite interesting, just the history behind it, and just the amount of work that it took those men and women to dig those tunnels, and the work involved. It's just astounding when you're in those tunnels and you think some people worked there and dug these out by hand. Like no big explosives, shovel and pick, and away they went. And then just amazing views from these little places where they had cannons and guns, and yeah, just a great historical site, just amazing landscape, and an important part of the history. It's the gateway to the Mediterranean, and just so much history in Gibraltar. And although we did a bus tour, and another good option might be a cable car to the top. We didn't do that, but it might be a good option for other folks who have maybe a bit of mobility challenges, or maybe want to have a different experience. You can take a cable right to the top, and some people choose to walk back down again, but it is a long hike. I think it's something like 12 kilometers to hike back down. And you can go up and down in the cable car as well. But that's another option compared to a bus tour.
Yeah, I have to say, for those who know me, you know that I'm a bit nervous in a vehicle. This was quite the adventure because it's very steep hills that you're going up to um, in a small van, and basically you see you see the cliff and the roads. They say that there's passing cars, but really it's a single car road. So it's just I made the decision not to sit next to the window. So Bernie was nice enough to sit next to the window, so we wouldn't have to worry about that. But it is interesting.
Yeah, that was our first glimpse into those tight European roads where cars and trucks pass each other, and you're looking. There's a couple of inches, and they almost touch each other all the time. So it's just it's just a different type of driving and a different type of roads that we're used to in Canada and North America for sure.
Yeah, and there was actually like a traffic jam. So the bus had to stop. How do you say that? Like
On an incline.
on an incline backwards, and because the incline was so deep, the gas couldn't reach
Like the carburetor
the carburetor to
start.
get it started again. So everybody had to exit the van, and we had to climb, like walk all the way up for the rest of it for him to figure out. I would assume he put in more more gas, but anyway, our tour bus was there half an hour later, and we made it safely back down. So that was quite interesting. So let's talk about our second stop, which was Marseille. Marseille is a city in the south of France. It's actually the second largest city in France after Paris, and it is the oldest one in the country. It is in the area of Provence, and actually is the largest port in the Mediterranean. Nope.
Mediterranean, dear. Mediterranean.
Oh my God, that is so funny. I can't get that one out. So we had chosen to do a bike tour of the National Park of Les Calanques, which is the national park is about 20 kilometers in length and 4 kilometers in width. And Les Calanques is a unique kind of geological formation made of limestone, which makes the landscape breathtaking.
Yeah, it's really spectacular, and we had electric mountain bikes, and so we did a little short excursion, kind of into the city on the back alleys and the paths to get to the park, and then once we were there, we did some kind of double track with the e-mountain bikes and a couple of steep climbs on gravel, and then when we got to the more kind of more within the park, then we started going up this kind of paved snaking road with switchbacks, and got to a top of a mountain where we could see down onto a really beautiful beach. And then we went down, and it was like I think it was like almost 3 kilometers straight down, but again with all these switchbacks on paved road, and again it was probably just really wide enough for one car, but two cars were coming either way, and we were on bikes, and it was a really beautiful descent down to this spectacular beach. So we got off the bikes and spent maybe 15-20 minutes there, maybe a bit longer than that, I can't remember. Took some amazing photos, and then of course we had to climb back up. So we were a bit concerned about that climb because we had just gone down that hill, but the guy told us to put it on turbo, and so we did that, and then the climb wasn't too bad actually. So again, it was 3 kilometers, probably, like, for those of you who've done any biking, probably like 18, maybe 20% grade, which is really quite steep. But with the e-bike, it was not too bad. It was strenuous, but not something that you couldn't handle. But just amazing road. For those of you who've seen these bike photos where these amazing switchback of roads in the Alps or the Pyrenees, it was kind of that feel. Maybe not quite as high, but that type of feel. And another thing about Marseille, we were there, I think it hadn't rained in
2 months.
2 months, yeah, 2 months. One of the Uber drivers told us about that. And then that apparently brings on a type of wind called the Mistral. And it's a really a strong northern wind that impacts the Mediterranean, the northern part of the Mediterranean. And we were there during one of those peak wind periods. So it was very windy. So being on these kind of cliff-like roads on a mountain bike with these strong winds was kind of interesting and a bit challenging. But it was still lots of fun. But it was very, very windy.
Yeah, I had a hard time. Actually, I had a harder time getting on the bike when we were off it because of the winds. I suppose the bike was very heavy as well. Once I was on the bike, it was fine, but getting on with the wind was, holy cow, it was a real challenge. But I agree that that tour was amazing for the landscape. Just being on top and seeing all the winding road going down to the beach, and then getting to the beach where the water was such a nice blue green with I call them mountains, but they're calanques on each side with a little, fishing houses, or I don't know how you call those, but it was just breathtaking. I didn't feel that the bike back up was very much demanding, I guess, because of the e-bikes and the power that we had. But anyway, it was a very, very good decision as far as a tour goes.
Yeah, that worked out really good.
Yeah.
Another thing we did in Marseille after the bike tour, we stopped in the kind of old harbor area, and it's a really beautiful, kind of typical European vibe with sailboats everywhere docked, and a big giant square around the old harbor with European cafes where you can sit on the kind of waterfront and have a coffee or an espresso or a beer and just kind of people watch and have a dessert. And we did some of that and just watch the world go by in Marseille, and that was a really nice vibe as well. Before we ended up heading back into the ship. So we didn't see a lot of Marseille itself except that kind of downtown core, but the e-bike trip in Les Calanques was definitely worth it. One of the highlights so far, and there has been a lot of them, but
yeah,
that was really a highlight that I'll never forget.
Yeah, for sure. So that wraps up our first podcast for our 14-day cruise. We'll be back shortly because we will be sharing our experiences in Italy. Lots of highlights in Italy, as you can imagine. So please tune in for the next one. But that's a wrap for the gateway to the Mediterranean.
Closer. Mediterranean. Gateway of the Mediterranean. There you go.
All right, so that's it for today. Keep listening in, and viva vacation.
Safe travels, everyone.
Yeah.